We have a really fine group of panelists today. Really pleased to welcome Cathy Caples. And the fun part I had mentioned at our last event is that by doing this virtually, we get to include friends from around the country. And Cathy is joining us. She's not a San Diegan. Cathy can give a little more about herself, but she is with the Points of Light Service Enterprise Initiative. We also have Glenn Rossman, one of our favorite stars of the volunteer initiative at the Conservancy, who's a member of the Conservancy Board of Trustees and chair of the Volunteer Engagement Committee and longtime volunteer for the Visitor Center. We have Audrey Tamayo, our project coordinator and former AmeriCorps fellow. And then we have Grant Reeder, our director of visitor experience. I know there's a number of you also on the call that I'm sure could lend your expertise to this conversation. We'll focus today on these 4 panelists, but look forward to any questions you have as we go forward. This one I'm going to ask for a virtual or your own. If you're super tech savvy, you can raise your hand using the Zoom tool, but we're going to start with a little icebreaker. And that is, raise your hand if you have ever volunteered for a nonprofit. Show of hands. Let's go to gallery view for this one. Awesome. And just think to yourself, what made your experience inspiring, or what kept you most engaged? I think that's kind of where we want to be thinking about this. I might call on one person to share that experience with us. How about Pam Hamilton Lester? You can take yourself off mute. Tell us, set us on the right foot here.
You want me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, for me, and I know that you probably want to talk about bigger issues about how the organization can really make your time there wanting you to come back. I mean, a lot has to do with the way the organization treats volunteers. But for me, what engaged me was it has to be the cause. So if the cause is big enough, you can treat me any way you want, I'll still volunteer for the cause.
Thanks, Pam. We're glad to see you here.
Thank you.
All right, we will not hold ourselves any further. We're going to move ahead and begin with our questions. Let's start with Cathy. Cathy, could you describe the concept of service enterprise and how implementing the service enterprise principles benefits an organization like the Balboa Park Conservancy?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to let you know, I'm a consultant to Points of Light. I'm not coming from that far away. I'm a Californian, and I'm in Fresno, and I regularly visit your wonderful community. And I was part of the team that developed the Service Enterprise Initiative, which is what I was asked to talk about today. And I want to congratulate you at the Balboa Park Conservancy, because you are one of 600 organizations across the country that is in this, you are a certified service enterprise. And so you really should applaud yourselves, because it is takes a year to 2 years to go through the process. And Glenn will probably share a few things that you learned along the way. But I want to first kind of set the stage for you, and I'm going to be looking at my notes because I have a lot I want to share based on our pre-call in a relatively short amount of time. So Points of Light, a lot of times people go, what is that? It is an international nonprofit that was founded because of President George H.W. Bush. When he talked about how we all can be better than ourselves and we can be shining lights for our country. And so based on that speech, this nonprofit was formed to present the Daily Points of Light Awards that have been given every day. We've given over 6,000 of them since it started. And Points of Light's mission is to create a society where it's easy to take action. And we work to inspire, equip, and mobilize volunteers And we do it with individuals, we work with nonprofits, and the capacity building initiative that you are a part of with Service Enterprise is one of those programs. We also work with corporations and businesses to help them work on their social responsibility initiatives. So I also want to let you know about the volunteer ecosystem. One of Points of Light's partners is a branch of government dedicated to volunteerism called the Corporation for National and Community Service. It's best known for its programs like AmeriCorps, Vista, and probably its best known senior corps program is RSVP, which I do know you have in San Diego. And in 2009, during the recession, the Edward M. Kennedy Act reauthorized and expanded AmeriCorps. And I don't know if you guys remember the phrase boots on the ground. We were going to get boots on the ground out there with our AmeriCorps members to do great things. And in that act, there was a $5 million fund. It was called the Volunteer Generation Fund. And that was for everyone to start thinking about how can we involve more people in volunteerism in our country. And so that funding was only available to state commissions, and that's the state organizations in government that run AmeriCorps programs. And our California volunteers leaped on the opportunity to be a part of it. They were a part of a cross-sector coalition called Reimagining Service that included philanthropy and business, corporations, government, nonprofits, all talking about what's going on with volunteerism. And some research was done by the TCC group, and that research revealed that organizations that use volunteers are significantly stronger, better led and managed, more adaptable and capable of going to scale across all organization capacities, not just volunteer management. It also told us that less than 15% of organizations that were studied are actually doing volunteer management well. And one piece that just stood out in my mind, if you think about that 0 to 100 scale, the highest score was 30%. And that part of volunteer management was recognition. So if you think of everything else that has to be done to inspire volunteers to be with you and stick with you, recognition was the best they were doing at 30%. So the other piece that I just want to share before I dive more deeply into the service enterprise, because what happened was California volunteers applied for the funding. We were granted the funding in California, and we invited 4 volunteer centers across the state to work with research organizations to develop curriculum that would help organizations like yours do a better job to build capacity. And so, but the other piece I want to mention is during that same time, the AmeriCorps VIP program was founded that Audrey has been a part of and has continued to this day since 2009, serving organizations to help build volunteer capacity. So now I'm actually going to answer Sarah's question as, let's define service enterprise and its concepts. So a service enterprise is fundamentally an organization that leverages volunteers and their skills to really deliver their mission. And the goal of service enterprise is to strengthen the capacity of organizations to address community needs. These high-performing organizations have deeply integrated volunteers into their strategic plan and into their day-to-day activities and operations. And they're reducing costs and increasing efficiency and effectiveness because of it. And so just on my first call with your organization to plan for this time together, right away, it was obvious that that has happened in your organization as you're working at your park improvements and you're looking at going to your placemaking initiative. So how do we do this? There is a process, and like I mentioned, it takes 1 to 2 years. And what we do is we start by utilizing your organizational assets to strengthen your capacity. We do a diagnostic tool that's based on the original research, and we help you look at your assets that you already have, your strengths, and then build upon those strengths with individualized action plans. Following that, there's a period of time that we provide you with a coach, and your coach was Sue Carter-Kale, a good friend of mine from our days of being hands-on affiliate directors. And then you take off and you run with it. One of the key areas that we require for service enterprise is strong leadership support. We don't start working with that middle manager, the volunteer coordinator in an organization. We start with the executive team and make sure that that support is there, because strategically that's the only way that it's going to happen. Another focus area is strengthening the well-developed human resource practices. And we really focus on bringing together volunteers and staff. It's volunteers and staff, not volunteers or staff, and creating what we call the human capital team. Another, we use a change management strategy to accomplish our service enterprise. And we use John Cotter's leading change model. He's a Harvard professor that's been doing this work for decades. And we really, in that process, emphasize that we really need to focus on that continuous improvement piece, that this isn't just a curriculum that you go through, you fill out, you do a few things and then you're done with it. You're evaluating and constantly improving where you're headed with volunteers.
Cathy, it sounds like that's exactly where Glenn, where you've kind of put that positioning of how you carry that through is exactly where I think Glenn started to get engaged in how the volunteer engagement committee was even formed out of that recommendation to sustain that and have that team of volunteer and staff moving it forward. Maybe Glenn can speak to that in his role of executing on service enterprise. Glenn, are you?
He's still in there.
You want me to jump into that now, eh?
Yeah.
You caught me off guard.
Well, I could help you jump just by mentioning the tree planters, right? That you helped the tree team.
Well, actually, I'd like to go back further, and I think we may be a little bit different. I know, Cathy, you mentioned staff and volunteers. We really went back and involved some of our, at least one of our trustees. I was a board member at the time, and when we established our service enterprise initiative, we had 4 or 5 staff members go to the training process, as well as me. And I was chosen, I think, for a couple reasons. One was because I was a longtime volunteer, so I was kind of on the volunteer side of things. And the other was because I was a board trustee, and I was the only, as I recall, member of the board that, of any of the organizations in our group of whatever, 12, 15 cohorts that were going through the training at the same time, that had a board member involved in that training. So I think it showed our organization's emphasis on adopting the service enterprise principles. We had a basic understanding. Connie Matsui had some familiarity, and I think introduced the possibility of having us go through this process. And so I went through that, of course, and have gone on from that time. So I'm not sure if you want me to hold off on more of my background and what my activity is in terms of volunteer engagement, or go forward. Sarah, what's your pleasure?
I think I'd like to hear from Audrey and tie these pieces together of the foundational elements of AmeriCorps Fellow. I think that's a cool synergy that the Conservancy has benefited from. So we'll go back to you, Glenn, but Audrey, if you could give us, kind of just an overview of how AmeriCorps Fellows work. You were our first one, and now we have a new one to introduce today. We won't go deep, but Brigitte, wave your hand. Brigitte is our newest AmeriCorps VIP Fellow. We're so happy you're here. Audrey, go ahead and speak to a little bit about AmeriCorps Fellows and what they provide organizations like us.
Yeah, so when I was an AmeriCorps Fellow, we actually had a whole cohort of different AmeriCorps Fellows that belonged to different organizations. So like the IRC, South Bay Community Services, Jewish Family Services, and everyone, you know, was there to expand capacity in their organization. So what we did is we kind of like shared different types of waivers with each other, bounced off different ideas of how to keep volunteers engaged, how to keep them feeling appreciated, and really making sure that, well, with each other, we kind of like had this support where we can like, you know, just share ideas and yeah, and bounce, like, yeah, share a bunch of ideas. And also too, we kind of like, if a volunteer was interested in doing more social work or more environmental work, we kind of like shared their information with each other in within our cohort, which is a really cool like networking experience that us as volunteers at our organizations and the volunteers that were interested in different stuff could be a part of. So yeah.
Thanks, Audrey. I know there was a number of having that professional development and then bringing that expertise to the Conservancy has really helped us align these different volunteer initiatives, which, as Cathy mentioned, we have Tree Stewards, which Audrey helped launch that program, our Park Ambassador program, which we do in partnership with the City of San Diego. And those are volunteers that help actually with the visitor experience. So we have kind of this vertical of horticultural volunteers, and then we have a deep history of the volunteers who've helped the visitor center with a variety of questions and information desk help, as well as tours. And so Grant, you're relatively new to the team, but you've taken on this whole crew of volunteers in the visitor center, you know, that Glenn has been a part of that cohort, you know, for a really long time. What do you think is unique about volunteering in our visitor center, and how do you see that evolving past COVID? You can speak to what you've been doing, but I think that would be an interesting conversation from you.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. And it's been a really interesting experience having joined the organization in February, and then COVID coming in and basically shutting down the park mid-March. Coming back in, obviously volunteers form a huge component and piece of the team that consists of our entire group in the visitor center. We have a small number of staff and had over 100 active visitor center information desk volunteers. We have about 20 to 25 of those are actively working in the park now with the visitor center information desk, which due to the pandemic, we've had to move the information desk outside into the plaza under a big tent, which helps keep our volunteers and visitors safe. So that's one of the key components in making sure that our volunteers are safe, staff are safe, and visitors are safe during this time. But going past COVID, volunteers have always been an integral and very important part of our visitor center. They provide all of the information that people come into the visitor center to ask about what's going on at various attractions and institutions, the history of the park, the horticulture of the park. And to satisfy some of these needs, we also organize tours, and we're starting to get back into that because people do like to specialize in the type of information they get and the interest that they have in the park.
Thanks, Grant. And Glenn, on the heels of Grant's overview of the visitor center experience, I know you have a unique experience as trustee and volunteer. Did you want to elaborate, finish the first part of the panel question we started with you?
Sure. You know, I guess I'll go back as you mentioned on, I've been volunteering for a long time. 19 and a half years ago, I started the Visitor Center Information Desk. And Then I became involved in the board of Balboa Park Central, and then continue on when that organization merged with Balboa Park Conservancy in 2014. And I think that the service enterprise training really allowed us to understand more fully the benefits of integrating volunteers into more aspects of the organization, utilizing volunteers to extend our mission, not to save money. I think that's one of the, I know the terminology that Cathy used, and it's what the Service Enterprise Initiative uses, is leveraging volunteers. I avoid that particular type of terminology because it conjures up in my mind that we're trying to, in a sense, take advantage of volunteers. Leveraging is a way to, I guess, get more work out of people in some respects. That's why we established a committee called the Volunteer Engagement Committee. I was very strongly supporting calling it that we engage volunteers, not leverage volunteers. And another idea of our commitment to service enterprise is that we made up this committee, which is a standing committee of the board. And we got our certification. The person that gave us was the primary determining person of our certification, said she did not recall any other organization that had dedicated a committee of the board to be involved in this process. And our committee also, to make sure that we're engaging people, it's made up of not just board trustees, it's equal membership of the board and staff and volunteers. So certainly it's my part of this process was helping me learn about nonprofit volunteer management and engagement. And my participation in this initiative and now the Volunteer Engagement Committee is kind of where I see my biggest impact on the Conservancy. It's been a great pleasure to be a part of this program that's developing a sustainable volunteer base, expand our volunteer base, engage volunteers to extend a mission, and really provide an excellent experience for our volunteers. So we're looking at not only what can volunteers do for us, but what can we do for volunteers. I think this committee all feels that having a group of engaged and satisfied volunteers will really improve the volunteer experience for them and clearly improve what they can do for us.
Thanks, Glenn. I've always loved how you positioned that opportunity for our organization to work with volunteers, and the way you reframe that conversation about leveraging. I think that means a lot to everyone that you work with too. Cathy, I just want to bring things to current events. I think that would be interesting to talk about briefly. Is you work with a number of organizations around the country, and I just wondered if you could share with us what you've been seeing other organizations do to engage their volunteers during this time when we can't always be together, and a lot of volunteers really count on that.
My role at Points of Light right now is to read the certifications that come in from our hub network, and we validate them and then award the Service Enterprise certification. And so what I really love as one of our pieces of research showed that service enterprises would be more adaptable and able to expand during any situation. And the adaptation that has been going on during COVID has been pretty incredible. And just some things, like we have a national partnership with Best Friends Animal Rescue, and they certify organizations around the country. And they've had a real emphasis on emptying the shelters and moving them into foster care. So they've been continuing and expanding the recruitment of foster care and having volunteer leaders actually mentor and train these brand new foster families. We've seen a lot of what was happening today, the type of communication. We're so blessed that we're in this world with this kind of technology during a pandemic, where we can still get face-to-face with our volunteers and share trainings and experience. The state of Massachusetts just actually did a whole summer series. Service Enterprise has 10 characteristics, and they took 10 weeks over the summer to bring together organizations across the street that were across the state that were certified and not, and they talked about each of them and learned from one another. And so that peer support that was mentioned from the different cohort kind of mentality continues. We've also seen our one certified university in the country was given 24 hours to develop a housing plan for students that were the dorms were being closed, right? And they needed to go somewhere. 24 hours to garner that support and get it all ready to go. And they did it. In 24 hours, they had the homes, the volunteers, the policies, the procedures, everything completed, and not one student needed it because they were able to meet their own housing needs. So they've now got a resiliency plan on the shelf if they ever need it again. Knock on wood, we won't. And so, just really exciting types of things. And I don't know, what else you've done since, I think Grant mentioned a few, you're continuing and each month brings new ideas and new opportunities. And I think the volunteers are really stepping up to say, how can I help? I know one of the things, Iowa, I was certifying an Iowa food bank, and there's a shortage nationally of bags because of all the fast foods, and and they have volunteers that can't go into the shelter anymore because of age or vulnerability, and so they're actually creating grocery bags out of t-shirts. And so that's another creative way.
That's so clever. Cathy, thank you for sharing that. I think it helps to hear what's happening, beyond our front doors and out in the world. Grant, maybe you can speak to a little bit of that, how we're engaging during this time and what that looks like. And then maybe after that, we can move to Q&A.
Sure. From the very get-go of the pandemic, and once our visitor center closed, we engaged our volunteers through Zoom happy hours and updates to all of our volunteer groups across the board to keep them informed and keep connected with our volunteer groups, because it was seen as very important for all of us to stay connected. And so this is something that we started right away and continued throughout and continue to this day, because not all of our volunteers are able to return to the park. So we stay connected with them as they remain safe in their homes or gradually return to the park and engage the way they used to. So that's one of the ways that we stay engaged and keep them informed. Also through email, everybody gets regular updates.
Cool. Thanks, Grant. I'd love to move to Q&A. I think there were even some questions that were in our RSVP form before we started. So I'll lead with that first one, and then I'll open up the floor. You can use the chat function to type in your question. That might be easier for us to maybe moderate, or you can physically raise your hand or use your raise your hand function too. It works. So the first question that came through our RSVP is that this person heard that we're about to launch a garden stewards program, and they've been anxiously awaiting that for a long time. Is there, Audrey, maybe tag team Audrey and Jackie to speak to this new volunteer initiative, if you're willing?
Sure, yeah. So we got our right of entry, and that right of entry includes like restoring garden infrastructure, and includes the garden stewards and the tree stewards too, since our previous right of entry was timing out. And so that allows for volunteers to help out in the gardens, help Parks and Rec, who are usually understaffed and don't have the time to upkeep a lot of the gardens in the park. And so we actually have a meeting next week, a garden steward update meeting with a lot of really like very helpful people. I think Nancy Carroll Carter, you're part of that meeting. And then Nan Sturman, who is really awesome at just knowing everything about horticulture. And so we're going to be meeting about that and developing curriculum, and Brigitte is going to start doing the recruitment. And so we're really picking up yeah, we're really picking up the pace here and getting everything going. Megan Shaw is a horticulturist of Balboa Park. She's anxious and ready for it to start as well. So.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, this is a program that we've been talking about for a long time. At least I feel like I've been talking about it for a very long time. And, you know, we've had over a dozen projects that we've been working on, and we just, you know, we got to a bandwidth capacity with our staff, and we weren't able to fully launch the Garden Steward program this past year. But we do have a wait list of over 40 people that have expressed interest in garden stewards. So hopefully recruiting won't be too big a lift, Brigitte, but we'll get there. So this program, as Audrey mentioned, it'll be somewhat crafted around a very similar template as the tree stewards, but the curriculum that we're building is specific to gardens. So it's a lot of you know, deadheading and pruning and mulching and weeding and all the maintenance that goes into gardens. You know, a lot of people are very eager to install trees or install plants, but then, you know, there's a lot of maintenance and upkeep that goes along with that. But there are luckily very passionate and geeky people that love to maintain the plants too, which is wonderful because that's what our park really needs. So Megan Shaw and I have been, you know, crafting this for a while, as well as Audrey, and we're super excited to get the online portion. So the way that this is going to be rolled out is this fall we'll be putting together the curriculum, the orientation curriculum, and then the actual in the classroom, which will be an online curriculum. And then there, of course, will be a hands-on in the park, in the garden training as well. And we're hoping to do that probably in the springtime. So if you have any questions or know of anyone that's interested, please send them our way.
Thanks, Jackie. Let's see, I'm looking for raised hands, or Dylan and Christine, let me know if there was, Hamilton Lester, I see you.
I'm not going to have the nomenclature right, but I know that the Conservancy is part of the program by the Central Park Conservancy in terms of working with other parks and kind of everybody coming up to the same understanding about what it takes to be a good park conservancy. And I was watching their 40-year anniversary video the other night, and they also were talking about their volunteer program. So have we been also gaining ideas from the Central Park Conservancy about the things that we're doing with our volunteer program?
Yeah, I can speak to that. We definitely have been collaborating. There's a cohort of 5 other conservancies and joint powers that are part of that Central Park Lab Institute that we're a part of. And we definitely have been sharing and collaborating information as far as volunteer programs are concerned. So there's a lot of different ways that these programs have been launched, and you know, whether it's one-time volunteers or ongoing volunteers. So that has been a tremendous asset to have that collaboration.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pam, that was a great question. Other hands, if I miss one, someone has to shout out. Unmute yourself, go ahead. No?
I have, so this isn't a question, it's more of a testimonial. So so when I came on board with the Conservancy, I think everybody knows I'm a staff person, but in addition to that, I was really excited when we were launching first the tree stewards program, and I know absolutely nothing about plants, even though I love them. So I was really excited to just get involved in a new program that we were launching. And I remember showing up to our first day of training and being really struck by all of the detail and the time and resources that Jackie and Audrey and everybody put into developing that program and partnering with Tree San Diego. And it really struck me about how much we really valued educating all of the tree stewards about what it like. I mean, we even talked about, what is photosynthesis? Like, it was like almost going back to basics about how to care for plants, how to, trees live and grow, and why those first years of a tree's life are so critical. And it was really exciting to be a part of that, because I'd been to other volunteer programs, not through the Conservancy, but just, growing up and being involved in other activities where you kind of just start and you're thrown into stuff and you're like, oh, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll figure it out along the way. But it was really starting from the ground zero of, we want to make sure that everybody knows the basics before we kind of develop it as we go along of what you're going to take on as a volunteer. And I think that that's something that's really resonated with a lot of the volunteers. Like the fact that, Glenn's been a volunteer in the visitor center for years and years, and so many other of our volunteers have been around for a long time too. I think it really goes to show just how much we've taken into really investing in our volunteers. So thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Jackie, and everybody.
Thanks, Dylan, for that. I appreciate your insights as being like the newbie coming in, and you were actually part of one of the first trained tree steward groups. But it speaks, to what Glenn was talking about earlier is, this is a give and take. We have things that we can offer, and they have time to offer us and offer to the park. So if they're willing to, go out and monitor these trees, the least we can do is provide, as much education as possible. So, it's a give and take on both sides.
Yeah, I have to say, my dad was my very first volunteer I recruited as the AmeriCorps Fellow. And he told me, I'm only staying for a year. And now I think it's been over 2 years that he's been volunteering, and his trees were shorter than him. And he sent me a selfie the other day, and the Brisbane boxes were like above him. And he's like, I love volunteering. He actually recruited my godfather too, and they've been just at it, like they're going this Saturday to check on their trees. So I think people fall in love with the park even more so when they volunteer here. So.
Thanks, Audrey, Dylan, and Jackie. I think the spontaneous testimonials are kind of the best. I do encourage you, there's a lot of questions still, I'm sure, that will come up when it comes to volunteers. And I think Nancy Carter-Carroll, we have one to get back to you offline about visitorship and volunteers in the visitor center. But I hope this provided at least a snapshot picture of what goes into our volunteer initiatives and our program, which have more than tripled in the past 2 years, and have been supported by a number of folks on this call, including Connie and Glenn and Lynn and Joe Fish. We have a number of folks who have supported this effort and initiative ongoing for our AmeriCorps Fellows. And I think that I feel encouraged and inspired by all that's being done, and there's so much more potential. I'm really happy to be working with this team. And I'm really happy to see all of you on these calls. As I said, school's back in session. So we will be doing the next one in November. And we had a great new name for it, but essentially we're talking about the virtual visitor experience. We're talking about bringing a number of some of our park favorite guests to see what is happening around the park from a virtual perspective. Not all the museums are open yet. And we think it'll be interesting to really see and maybe experience firsthand what's going on in and around the park with our park friends. And in the meantime, thank you again for coming. I've got Connie, where's Connie? Sometimes I lose this. I'd like to tee up Connie Matsui, our board chair, for some final remarks.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for participating and for you know, creating the enthusiasm and the expertise that makes this volunteer program so special and so uplifting. Wonderful to hear directly from you, Cathy. Thank you for everything you're doing for programs around the country. And also, Glenn, what can I say? I always say that we hit the trifecta with Glenn when he became a volunteer with the Central and then the Conservancy. And of course, our wonderful team, Dylan, what a testimonial. Grant, thank you for jumping in with both feet and doing so well. Audrey and Jackie, you're both superstars. So thanks so much for a wonderful way to start our evenings. And we look forward to any ideas you have for future Parkside Chats. Please stay in touch if there's anything that you'd like to talk about. All right. And thank you, Sarah, our wonderful MC.
Just an observation, Sarah. When I joined the Conservancy, we volunteered for almost everything. They didn't have staff. And I think as we accumulated the staff stayed unbelievably friendly with all the volunteers, which was a huge help. You can go to them, they're helpful. And I think that makes a world of difference because you feel comfortable. It's not like, oh, I did that and now they don't even want to talk to me. You don't. And I think that volunteering when we first started, because everybody was a real hands-on organization, stayed involved with it. And I want to compliment everybody, especially the staff, how friendly they are and how good they are and how much fun it is to see them.
Alan, that was a great ending. I really appreciate that. That was a good bookend. Thank you for sharing, and thanks, Connie. Thanks everyone for coming tonight.